In this video, we will be talking about shooting portrait-style photography in brightly lit conditions. For most portrait photos, you want a fairly short depth of field to isolate your subject against the background. One thing that can make this a bit more difficult is shooting portraits in an area full of bright light. In this setting, a wide aperture can be difficult to work with. In this lesson, you'll look at how to keep things in check when shooting a portrait in bright conditions. Depending on your style of shooting, there are a few different ways to go about this. First, what we want to do is make sure we have enough depth of field. If we aim to shoot about 15 feet away with 150mm focal length, you're looking at a composition that looks something like this. A head and shoulders shot on a crop sensor camera. Input these numbers into our depth of field calculator, and we get a depth of field of about 4 inches at f2.8, 5.7 inches at f4, and almost 8 inches at f5.6. I like to focus on the eyes, and according to the calculator, the depth of field is split pretty evenly in front and behind the focus point. This means that if we have 4 inches of depth of field at f2.8, and we hit the focus on the eyes, we will just barely get the nose in our depth of field, but the back of the head will start to be soft because that is outside of our depth of field by a few inches. This is probably okay, but you might want to take a few shots and compare. The other thing to deal with is the background. If we are in brightly lit conditions, our main task will be balancing the exposure of our background with the exposure of our subject. This can be hard to do just using natural light because you don't have a lot of control. You probably want to avoid using direct, open sunlight on your subject because that's going to be really harsh looking. The only exception to this is if you are shooting during sunrise or sunset, also known as magic hour. If this is the case, you want the sun at your back or close to it. Either way, a tool that can really save your butt is a speed light with high-speed sync. Because we want to keep our aperture open, we will have lots of light. ISO will not be an issue, so we can keep that nice and low. We will be dealing with very fast shutter speeds. At this speed, a normal flash is not going to work because your image sensor is not exposed to the light the entire time. The first curtain opens and begins to reveal the sensor, but right after that, the second curtain starts to close. So your sensor is only being exposed to a slit of light. When the flash pops, part of the sensor will be blocked by the second curtain. High-speed sync gets around this by pulsing the flash in sync with the curtain and exposes the frame evenly. It's really quite remarkable and a valuable tool to have. The downside is that because it pulses, the output of the flash is cut way down. It should be enough to get you a bit of extra exposure on your subject. Let's take a look at the situation I'm going to be dealing with and get to some shooting. All right, here we are outside, and we're going to attempt to take some portraits here in this really brightly lit scene here. Now, there is not a single cloud in the sky. We're getting a little bit of shadowing here from the trees, but this is not ideal portrait lighting for sure. Right now, the sun is behind the subject, and the subject is my daughter, Ella. And we're going to attempt to kind of make the best of this situation here. So to start, I'm about 15 feet away from her, and I have a 70-200 f2.8 zoom lens here. And I'm going to try and shoot right around 150mm and see what I have to do to make this work here. Now, I do have a radio trigger on because we may need a flash, but I'm going to pop this off for a second so that I can pull up the shutter speed. And I'm on manual here, and I'm at ISO 100, f2.8, and I'm on center weighted average, and it says about 1/500th of a second shutter speed is right. And if we look at that picture, let me take one more here. Ella, look right here and smile. We can see that we're getting a super strong backlight. And actually, we could probably even go to like 800 shutter speed because that backlight looks really, really strong. The problem with that exposure is we're not getting a really great exposure on our subject. Now, we could try and spin around and use the sun as our main light, but that's going to be really, really harsh. And depending on what time of day you're shooting, that may not work, especially if the sun is directly overhead. Right now, it's about 4 p.m. on the East Coast here. And so that's not gonna be super great for an exposure. But what we can do is we can add a speed light here to help fill in the face. So I'm gonna grab that and set that up, and we're gonna take a look at what that looks like here. All right, what we have here is just a speed light and a simple radio trigger that does high speed sync. And what I'm gonna use this for is to basically just fill in the front of the exposure here. So because we're using a telephoto lens here, we can get the speed light in pretty tight and it's not gonna affect our shot here. Right now, I am gonna use ETTL metering for the flash, and then I'll use flash exposure compensation to get it up and down. So let me take a quick test shot here and see where we are. And I do have it on high speed sync. So right now it's in the neighborhood, but it's a little bit hot. So I'm gonna roll this down just a little bit. Good, we're getting there. Right now I'm at -2, and I'll try -3. And that's pretty good. I do wanna lower it down just a hair so I can get it a little bit more in her eyes here. There we go, and maybe from the front just a little bit more. Look right here and smile. Nice, that's pretty good. There you go, turn in towards the light, that's nice. That's not too bad. Now we're getting a really nice exposure on her, but the flash is still a little hot. Setting this on ETTL didn't give me quite enough range to pull the flash down where I needed it to. So what I did is I put it in manual mode, and now I can go into the menu here on this camera, and I can pull it down. Right now I'm at 1/8. So I'm gonna pop it down to 1/16, because I do just want just a little bit of punch. So somewhere between 1/8 and 1/16, maybe down a third from 1/8. Now these are all at f2.8. If we wanted a little bit more depth of field, it's not gonna drastically change the background blurring that we get. So let's try one at f4 here. And I'm gonna have to roll the shutter speed back to like 1/500th. Good, those are better. That's great. Turn more towards the flash. Good, very good. Great, so we're getting a nice balance here with these settings here right now. I'm at f4, 1/500th of a second, and my flash here is set to just 1/3 of a stop under 1/8 exposure. We could even go to f5.6 and probably around 320. Now I'm probably gonna have to boost the flash just a hair. Now I'm a third stop under 1/4 flash exposure. So Ella, turn towards the flash again. Beautiful, yep, tip your chin up just a little bit. Good, and smile. Good, much better, that's great. So if you're trying to shoot portraits out in conditions like this where you have not a lot of cloud cover, not a lot of shade, this is a great way to get some pretty nice looking results. Again, we're getting a nice exposure on the background here where the background drops pretty nice away. We can still see it, but it's, you know, it's not completely in darkness, and we're getting a nice exposure on the subject with just one simple flash here. If you had a reflector, we could possibly use some natural light, but this is a really quick and easy setup to get some pretty decent results out here in less than ideal conditions.